Hey everybody, Rob from Karma Comic Chameleon coming at you with another ProRevenge story. Revenge Trifecta unfolds with one phone call. Let's jump right in. Did you know we're one of the only channels that asks permission from the authors to use their stories? That's gotta deserve a subscribe, right? This happened almost 20 years ago, so some of the laws, punishable offenses, and punishments have been changed since then, and some of the details may be lost for all eternity. Some background. I grew up very sheltered and had no idea how the world works. I also didn't realize my family life wasn't normal. This is partly because I was on the spectrum, but wasn't diagnosed until in my late 30s, and partly because I grew up with abusive and religious parents. However, it was nowhere nearly as bad as some of the stories on here. I was mentally, emotionally, verbally abused by my father, who was a classic narcissist. He didn't physically abuse me, but the threats he made indicating he would was enough for young naive me to be terrified of him. My parents strictly taught us that we must wait until marriage to be intimate with our spouses. My parents told me I didn't matter, nor did I deserve anything better than what I had. I was always an afterthought. Young me believed everything they taught me. My escape. While in high school, I was extremely awkward and unable to make friends due to my lack of social skills. My dad forbade me from working to earn money, so I was trapped living with him. When I turned 18, I got my first job working as a host at a popular restaurant chain. I started to make a few friends, and the happiness and joy my family had managed to obliterate began to slowly return, and I started to gain confidence and pride in myself. While working there, I was introduced to a cute guy who worked in the catering department. We flirted and eventually started dating. His family was so nice, and I was in a little bit of a culture shock. I remember realizing how terrible my family is. After many months, he started getting frustrated with me because I wouldn't be intimate with him. Red flag, flapping violently in the tempestuous wind. I explained that the only way I'd sleep with him is if we were married. I was desperate to get out of my parents' house, and he was desperate for sex. So for clearly all the right reasons, we spontaneously drove to Vegas and got married. Our families were obviously surprised, but his family was supportive and helped us get an apartment. I grew close to his family, and we all had a great relationship. Things were going great for a few years, and my husband was a senior manager in a local restaurant and bar, which was very successful. I was making more friends with our employees, and I was so much happier. We moved to an apartment complex that most of the employees lived at, so we all got together to hang out and have barbecues. I hired my younger brother to be a host, and none of the employees knew that their new host was my brother. I no longer had my maiden name. They gossiped and made fun of me to him, and I discovered that the employees resented and hated me for being a lazy trophy wife. We were successful enough that I didn't have to work, but I managed a floral shop and loved my job. They didn't know this because I went to work when they were going to bed. The day that changed everything. 3 years in, I met up with some friends at our bar on the 4th of July. We had dinner, and I had one drink at this point when my friends had to go take their kids from the babysitter over to their parents. They said they'd be back in an hour. I went up to the bar to get another whiskey, and about 5 minutes later, I'm starting to feel woozy. I luckily don't remember what happened in the next few hours, but I found out that a couple guys led me off the property, and the manager at the door let them. Several hours later, my brother found me in the alley behind the restaurant and went to get my husband. I vaguely remember him loading me up into his truck, and he took me home, put me in bed, and went back to work. The next morning, I told him what happened, and he called me a liar and said I just got wasted. I felt crushed by the lack of support and his apathy. I took myself to the emergency room to have the test done, and then to the police station to file a report for kidnapping and sexual assault. The owners and managers brushed the evidence aside, insisting that I just got hammered on a holiday. However, because I'm claiming that this happened on the restaurant's property, I wasn't allowed to come here in case it happened again. I was furious, so they said I was too drunk, but they worried I'd be drugged and assaulted again. Nope, sorry folks, y'all can't have it both ways. The beginning of the end. This is where things start to go downhill. For almost a year, I didn't see my husband. He'd crash at a friend's house after work and only come home after I left for work. He'd be gone for work when I got home. When I did see him, he was extremely verbally abusive, and due to his large stature versus my tiny frame, the fact he'd previously thrown my 8-week-old puppy against the wall during his rage, I was legitimately scared of him hurting me badly. Slowly, all the friends I'd made had dropped me and sided with him to keep their jobs. I had no one to talk to except my boss and friends at the floral shop. Well, his birthday rolled around, and after the restaurant closed and there were only staff present, I decided to go wish him a happy birthday and beg him to try to work on things and possible therapy. Well, he was irate that I was there and picked me up by one of my arms, physically threw me out the front door of the building, and told me to go find someone else to put up with my shit, and so I did. By morning, I had loaded all my clothes and a few of my belongings into my car and went to my parents' house. I told them everything and cried to my family about the sexual assault, the abuse, and how my husband basically kicked me out of the house and I had nowhere to go. My dad proceeded to tell me that the sexual assault was my fault for dressing like a f***ing and being at the bar in the first place. I was wearing a blouse and jeans. I was asking for it. Then he told me that if I had just obeyed my husband and done what he wanted, I wouldn't have ruined my marriage and brought disgrace upon our family. To say that hearing this from my father was heartbreaking would be an understatement. My mother stepped in and said I could stay with them for the time being. My captors. Now, what I haven't shared is that my husband and his family are from a different country. His parents moved to the US when their kids were really young, and they've lived here for most of their lives. His father had been approved for a work visa every year, and it was costing them $5,000 a pop. When his kids turned 18, they would need to apply for either a student or a work visa themselves to remain here legally. My husband and I married for love, so no violation there, but if I divorced him at that time, without the special exception I was unwilling to provide, he would lose his green card and be deported, causing him to have to start over and apply for a work visa on his own. I was then contacted by my husband's father, who threatened me with violence if I divorced his son before he had been naturalized as a United States citizen. They desperately wanted to get a cheaper, more permanent status, and they saw me as their golden ticket. He also said I'd never get any of our assets in the divorce if I didn't comply. See, they were counting on my husband to sponsor their family to be able to apply for green cards. This bastard wanted me to wait 2 years to divorce his asshat of a son. In hindsight, I wish I ignored him and that was the revenge I enacted, but I was seriously scared of these people, and keep in mind, I was dependent on my own family for shelter, and I'm on the spectrum, so some things aren't as obvious to me as they are to others. My limit is reached. Time went on and things deteriorated. The stress, manipulation, and blackmail was seriously messing with my mental health. My brother-in-law Mike is my husband's best friend, and he moved into our house. Mike spent 2 years bullying and verbally abusing me. Mike is also my dad's only employee, and a vital one at that. We had previously had a good relationship, but since I left my husband, every time I showed up at my father's shop to borrow some tools, Mike would smugly ask me in the most vile way how my divorce was going. Had I found a new man to torment, or something along those lines? I hit my boiling point when I learned my father is still friends with my abusive husband and lets him come build projects at his shop on the weekends. I felt helpless in this situation. However, whenever I came around, I'd hear little pieces of information and a plan started formulating in my head. I found a way to get my revenge on all 3 of these despicable men. Fact gathering. I learned that my husband had already made sure I'd never get any of our assets. I learned that my husband needed Mike to live there in order to help pay for our house. I learned how close the 2 of them really are once I was out of the picture, attached at the hip. I learned that Mike has for the last 8 years not applied for nor received a work visa, so he's here illegally. I learned that my dad can't do a lot of the heavy lifting at work due to an injury he acquired a couple years ago, which is why Mike's employment is so important. I learned that my dad filed Mike as an independent contractor, and I highly doubted he'd paid any taxes for 8 years. I learned that their grandfather is dying, and Mike and my husband want to go back to their home country to say goodbye. I learned Mike and my husband are going to fly up there, but are going to rent a car and drive across the border to attempt entry for Mike on a tourist visa. I learned what border crossing they're going to use. The Revenge. I called Homeland Security and made an anonymous report about an undocumented alien who has been living illegally in the US for 8 years. In order for them to verify this claim to be valid, I gave them Mike's birthday, a description of his appearance, home address, make, model, and license plate number of his car, cell phone number, and work address. I told them I know he is going to go to his home country to visit family in the next week or so. Mike is going to attempt to cross the border back into the US by car at specific border crossing as a tourist with the intention of going back to live and work here illegally. He is working as an independent contractor as a 1099 and probably hasn't paid his taxes for 8 years. Then I called the IRS and gave them essentially the same information. The aftermath. I heard from my dad that he was indeed stopped in a vehicle at the border crossing and detained. My husband watched his best friend and brother dragged away in handcuffs. Okay, I might be elaborating that small part, but the possible image of that in my mind makes me smile. Mike ended up being deported and can't return to the US for 10 years, so he's cut off from his family. The IRS is probably going after him for back taxes. My father's business took a bit of a hit, and he had to find and train a new employee. His profession is in construction and talent is hard to come by. I'd know because I'm in the same industry. My husband didn't have too difficult of a time finding another roommate, but he sure as wasn't his brother or best friend. And later on in the naturalization interview, I made sure my answers to all questions were as unhelpful as possible. I do know I threw up some red flags and delayed the process a bit, but I don't know how it turned out for him. I've had no contact with him since, and I plan to keep it that way. Wow, I sincerely hope things are going better for OP now. I can't imagine all of the torment she's been through over the years. I hope with a couple of these people out of her life that things are looking up and getting a lot better. I also want to thank OP for giving me permission to narrate their story today. You can find a link to their profile and the story in the description below. Please go there and give them an upvote. Once again, this is Rob from Karma Comic Chameleon saying thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I ask you to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share it with your friends, and we'll see you in the next one.